Since the late 19th century, we humans have been using guinea pigs as our subjects for different scientific experiments. Due to their biological similarities with humans and their suitable laboratory conditions, we've been mercilessly using these friendly and calm household pets as a replacement for humans in the laboratory. But what if someone tries to put real, warm-bodied humans on the experimentation table instead of those tiny creatures and films it for the world to see? Well, today we will talk about one such movie series that comes with a disclaimer that claims to be received by the director from an anonymous person. The movie also describes it as an experiment on the breaking point of bearable pain and the corrosion of people's senses. So, are you ready to witness some of the most brutal, barbaric, and excruciatingly violent films ever made in cinematic history? But I shall warn you that this film is not for the faint of heart. So shall we? But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Where did it all start? At the beginning of the 1980s, director Satoru Ogura was keen on making a series of movies based on highly graphic and violent films, and he made it possible by hiring manga artist and writer Hideshi Hino, who later expanded the series by directing 2 sequels. As the disclaimer of the movie suggests, the idea behind the movie was to create a violent and grotesque movie using such excellent practical effects that the audience might consider it a real snuff film. Soon after the movie was released, the audience and critics were baffled by the outcome, and it achieved the notoriety of the most dreadful slasher Japanese movie ever to be made. But have you ever wondered why such movies are made, and who is the audience that loves such inhumane acts for entertainment? The answer is gore. Just pure gore. These movies are the prime example of showcasing sadism at its best. If you expect a good story behind such movies, you will be utterly disappointed because they are made purely for the sake of the sadistic behaviors of humans. Well, some critically acclaimed movies like Saw, Final Destination, Hostel, Wrong Turn, and many more are also popular among the audience for their gruesome depiction of violence and bloodshed. Still, they were not the subject of an investigation by the Motion Pictures of America getting banned from every other country in the 90s or influencing some actual serial killers, unlike Guinea Pig. Guinea Pig Devil's Experiment. In 1984, after completing the first draft of his first entry in the series, director Satoru Ogura had difficulty casting for the first movie because of the challenges it demanded from its actors. And in the end, he managed to cast several unknown actors to perform the scenes in the movie. As the film was released as real-life found footage, a snuff movie, the actors were left anonymous to make it a sensationalized story of actual gore. The plot of the movie follows a motionless girl hanging outdoors on a net, who later gets picked up by 3 men and is taken to a torture chamber filled with varieties of equipment. The movie has no conventional story but is divided into 10 segments: hit, kick, play, spin, sound, skin, burn, worm, guts, and needle. And yes, the men torture that poor girl using all these techniques and by one as an experiment to know her breaking point. Now, do you understand where this movie got its name from? The film actually depicts a girl getting hit, clawed, and burned like an innocent guinea pig in a lab experiment, and when they wind up their experiment, they throw the girl again at the same spot they had taken her earlier, leaving her to die with her pain till they return for more. As I mentioned earlier, this film is not for the faint-hearted, and it will definitely affect you at some level because of its gore content. But while watching the movie, roughly a 43-minute clip, you get to understand from the establishing shot itself that the movie is meant just to give some arousal for the gore-loving audience without generating empathy for the victim. There is no character development, no backstory, nor any details of the girl. You just meet a random, motionless girl out of nowhere waiting to be tortured. This is a conscious decision of the director not to generate any sympathy for the girl. Instead, he wanted the audience to invest in the process of torture. In a movie like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we're aware that it's a movie made for entertainment and there is a story that acts as a narrative for the audience to care about the victims. But in this movie, which advertises itself as a real snuff film, the audience gets more invested in the torture process. In a sequence, the girl is mercilessly kicked and punched on her body by the 3 men. Then they pour hot oil on her body and throw maggots to eat her flesh while she is crying for help. In the end, the men throw her at the same place, frozen, to come back for another round of torture. This was fascinating for the 80s audience who were deeply invested in urban legends. Many horror filmmakers invented different tactics to sell their movies. Guinea Pig Devil's Experiments was one of them. It is obvious that the makers used some really good prosthetics, makeup, and practical effects to create the movie, it managed to create a buzz and became one of the most sought-after horror flicks in Japan. Guinea Pig 2: Flower of Flesh and Blood. After the renowned success of the first film, the makers released a second installment in 1985 with Japanese manga artist Hideshi Hino as the movie's new director. Though the movie was shot simultaneously with Devil's Experiments, the makers had to wait another year to release the film. Much like its precursor, the second installment also gained notoriety for its extreme violence and generated some worldwide controversy for some dreadful scenes. The matter became so severe that even the FBI had to interfere to investigate the movie's production. At a private screening in Hollywood, actor Charlie Sheen, who was an avid horror fan at that point, watched the movie and was deeply disturbed by the depiction of a horrific death scene, thus calling the FBI in fear of getting involved in an illegal snuff film screening. With a running time of 42 minutes, the movie starts on the streets of a dark alley of a Japanese city. The audience gets to see a beautiful girl dressed in black clothes trying to navigate her way on the streets, but before she can reach her destination, she gets hunted down by a man dressed in a samurai costume. The man uses chloroform to kidnap the girl and takes her to his torture chamber. There, he binds her onto a slab and slowly dismembers the girl using his tactics. Unlike the previous film, there is only one man here, but the things you will see are much more worse than the first film. He uses household items and homemade weapons to chop her body parts one by one. In one scene, he cuts her legs, and in one, he chops off her limbs slowly to generate fear among the audience. Then he gradually takes apart the body and then the face, and finally he cuts off the head to give the girl some mercy from pain. But suppose you'd think she is the first victim who became the prey of the samurai killer. In that case, you have no clue about his dreaded personality. However, at the end of the movie, you will get to see piles of bodies filled with worms lying on the ground. This comes as no surprise, as we know a hunter never stops hunting, and the samurai killer again roams around the city in search of his next victim. The movie uses extensive prosthetics and some groundbreaking practical effects that forces you to believe it to be a snuff film. After the release of the movie, the hype became so popular that one of Japan's most famous serial killers, Miyazaki, also known as the Otaku Murderer, took inspiration from this movie to abduct, mutilate, and murder 4 of his victims. Imagine making such a gruesome movie that inspires some actual psychopaths to kill their victims. Pretty inspiring, right? Guinea Pig 3: He Never Dies. After creating a lot of buzz around its blood, gore, and deaths, the third installment in the series surprised many. For this unusual film, the makers tried to do something different and created a forgettable movie that failed to match up to the hypes of its predecessors. However, this film finally shifts its narrative from torturing helpless girls to a man, which was fresh for a slasher movie, and focuses on his life. At the movie's beginning, we meet a Japanese office worker named Hideshi who suffers from depression due to his bland life. It is well known that the Japanese lifestyle is pretty busy and they suffer from high stress, long working hours, and high workload, which shuns a lot of people into depression. Due to his ongoing depression, Hideshi doesn't show up in the office for 4 days, and without any medication, he slowly starts planning to kill himself to relieve himself from his sufferings. But in an unusual turn, his plans do not go his way. Continuing the Guinea Pig series, the film suddenly jumps and again shows some really disgusting blood. In his attempt to kill himself, Hideshi picks up a razor and tries to cut off his wrist, but funnily enough, he doesn't feel any pain from his horrendous act. And the movie suddenly shifts from a gruesome tale of horror to an unfunny horror comedy. Like the other 2 movies, the lead character Hideshi tries different techniques to end his life in this version. He tries to cut off his body parts, his wrists, hands, legs, and even his throat. He also tries to strangle himself, only to realize that he is immortal and his wish to surrender to death will never be successful. So in the end, he calls one of his co-workers from the office, who by the way is the new boyfriend of Hideshi's ex-girlfriend, and invites him over to his apartment. But when he arrives at his place, Hideshi plays his nasty game of self-slaughter, mutilates himself, and chops off his head just to terrify him out of fear. This is the lowest point of this movie series. There are fantastic, humorous, and well-written horror comedies like Evil Dead 2, Shaun of the Dead, Beetlejuice, and many more, but He Never Dies is neither funny nor scary. It just dwells between 2 sub-genres to find a spot. Though there are some nasty, violent scenes in the movie, it never matches matches the amount of terror the previous films generated. It is silly and unfunny. After trying to kill himself throughout the movie, in the end, Hideshi is nothing but a talking head, shot on an 80s camcorder. The movie gives similar vibes of a homemade tape, and the practical effects seem to be very cheap and skanky. Suppose you try to compare it to the other films in this franchise. In that case, you realize that it's ultimately an oddball and seems like it is from a completely different genre, filled with a disgusting story, setup, direction, musical score, and even the gore. Devil Woman Doctor. Imagine you're sick and you have to run to the hospital, but when you reach the hospital, your doctor turns out to be a psychopathic killer. Pretty hard to digest, right? Well, this is the entire plot of this movie. When this slasher series first hit the DVD market, it was initially termed an urban legend, filled with rumor, intriguing stories, and false stories. But as the series continued, it gradually started to lose its charm. Suddenly, it became a forgettable horror comedy that failed to entertain its audience. Though it was released as the fourth entry in this six-part series, this was the last one to get a release. When we talk about the movie's plot, like any other film in the Guinea Pig series, it has a basic story that only focuses on torture and nothing else. In this movie, the story follows a woman doctor working in a hospital who uses her exotic medical experiments on her patients that are bizarre and unconventional, even for those who claim to have seen it all. Halfway into the movie, we also get to know that this woman doctor is actually a drag queen who has been posing as a woman to torture her patients in some of the weirdest circumstances. She loves to skin her patients, dismembering them and killing them without showing any mercy. Because this movie was made with a better commercial approach, it features some better special effects and gore scenes, making the effects more realistic, but while watching the movie, you can't get rid of the idea that it is still one of the worst in this series. The comedy aspects of the film never really hit the mark. It never makes you laugh, not even a tiny bit, because of the way it's written. There are far better horror comedies in Japanese cinema like Battlefield Baseball, Hard Revenge Millie, and The Machine Girls, where the comedy bits are incorporated wonderfully, with some great gore sequences that are loved by millions of fans. But here, there is a lack of everything. The story, the characters, and the kind of gore it represents are horrible. In one of the scenes, the doctor even kills a toddler and explodes her head during one of her rare treatment methods, so if you think that's funny, you can give it a try. Guinea Pig 5, Mermaid in the Manhole, directed by Hideshi Hino, who infamously directed the second film in the series Flower of Flesh and Blood. This is the first film in the series that might fascinate an audience because it has an intriguing story. The director finally found a worthy story to tell, and boy, he did succeed in telling this beautiful story, but not without some old-fashioned horrible gore. The movie starts with an artist visiting a polluted lake, which gives off the vibes of a sewer, to find inspiration for his next painting. There he finds a wounded mermaid suffering in the dirty sewer water. Seeing the mermaid in the dirty waters of the sewer, the artist revisits his childhood memories when the sewer used to be a beautiful lake with a life of its own. However, due to excessive pollution and development around the lake, it has turned into a dirty, smelly, and polluted sewer. After finding the mermaid, he brings her home, puts her in a bathtub full of fresh water, and starts taking care of her. But after a few days, the mermaid's health worsens, and she starts to develop cancer all over her body. Due to the cancer, her body starts to rot and release excessive amounts of pus from the tumors all over her body. But the mermaid has only one dying wish that she wants done before she meets her death. She wants the artist to paint her final portrait before she reaches her fate. But the movie never fails to remind you that it is a continuation of the infamous Guinea Pig series. So, the painting needs to be done using the pus coming out of the mermaid. This is new, isn't it? But don't worry, because the dirty pus coming out of her tumors isn't that ugly to look at, because they are colorful and vibrant. As she is a mermaid, her pus comes in 7 different colors, perfect for the artist to paint them on his canvas. Now, this might sound interesting, but there is more to it. This is not just about the final painting, but this movie actually has some suspense lying under the story. This film gives an ode to the underground Japanese cinema, with its themes of nature and how the existence of humans has been polluting the earth and its creatures. In this film, there is gore and blood, but there's some purpose behind it. For the first time since the beginning of the series, the makers paid some attention to the story story rather than using the killings and torture just to create some fake snuff film. Though there are some really horrifying scenes in the movie, like the mermaid vomiting a fetus out of her mouth and frightening tumors filled with pus and worms, they are just off-putting. The film also features a full-body post-mortem of the mermaid after she dies after the completion of the painting, which might scare some audiences because of its gore and blood content. But it is a far better movie in terms of everything from its predecessors. The ending of the movie might be the best thing about the entire series, where the audience is forced to think if all of it was real or just merely a dream inside the artist's head. Guinea Pig 6, Android of Notre Dame. Last but not least, Android of Notre Dame is the final film in the Guinea Pig series. Inspired by the famous Frankenstein, this movie tries to showcase a narrative filled with disturbing gore to maintain its glory. Made on a low budget and with a running time of 51 minutes, this film tells the story of a dwarf scientist, Karazawa, and his obsession with finding a cure for his terminally ill, beautiful sister. But his obsessive quest to save her leads him into a dark and horrific path through which he might never recover. After trying out hundreds of scientific studies, medicines, and traditional medicines, Karazawa fails to find any cure for her sister, and then finally he thinks of creating an android out of the dead bodies of unknown girls, using which he plans to either cure or transfer her sister's consciousness into a healthier body. He contacts a dealer who agrees to provide him with the dead bodies of some unknown girls for the experiments. After receiving the dead bodies, he uses them as his guinea pigs to perform his sadistic acts to visualize his goals. He dismembers the bodies, does his unusual and unethical scientific research on them, and finally finds a cure for his sister. But as I've already told you in the beginning, this movie is the Japanese take on the retelling of the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Much like Victor Frankenstein in the original story, Karazawa is a mad scientist with vast knowledge, but is instead the actual monster of this story. In the end, both the characters achieve greatness by succeeding in their goals, but they lose their morals while doing so. Like every other guinea pig film, this movie also uses extensive special effects, prosthetics, and a hell of a lot of blood to showcase the experiments on the cadavers. But this is far from scary, and it tries way too hard to recreate the similar gut-wrenching effects, but fails miserably. Though it tries to add some comic relief to take some time off its unnecessary slasher moments, the comedy never hits the audience. Even though the fourth film in the series, He Never Dies, was an oddball in the series, being a fresh approach to horror comedy after two highly controversial movies, He Never Dies had some really great moments that were pretty funny to watch. But Android of Notre Dame fails miserably because it tries hard to be a better film without succeeding. Why do we love gore? The slasher or gore genre has been around in cinema since 1963, when director Herschel Gordon Lewis released his horror film Blood Feast, about an immigrant Egyptian man responsible for killing multiple women as a sacrifice to an ancient Egyptian goddess. Upon release, this movie was trashed as a nasty video and banned from the theaters for showcasing such vile acts as a part of entertainment. Though films like Psycho generated much praise for their portrayal of violence on the silver screen in 1960 and never showcased the kind of body horror blood feast depicted in the cinemas. However, this new wave became popular when Tobe Hooper directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which hit the theaters in 1974. This film gave the slasher genre a new identity with its innovative story, iconic background score, and its villain, Leatherface. This was later revived by another fan favorite, Halloween, in 1978, and this continued to scare the audience who watched it for the sake of adrenaline rush, exploration of unknown fears, curiosity, and adventure. While watching a horror movie, we explore our unknown fears and learn how to fight with them by navigating the heroes who teach us how to face the fear with bravery. But when we talk about films like Guinea Pig, it is one of the prime examples of movies that are made for a limited crowd of audience who love the adrenaline rush in their veins. For example, Hollywood has produced a plethora of such movies like Saw, Hills Have Eyes, Hostel, I Spit on Your Grave, and many more to depict torture, pain, and killing as a means of horror to terrorize the audience. Though these movies, except Saw being an exception, never received critical acclaim, they are still loved by audiences as a part of the underground cinema. But why do particular audiences love watching their own species getting decapitated or tortured in certain movies? The answer is that this generates an exhilarating adrenaline rush and provides a thrill that is both frightening and exciting. Another thing that we need to understand about the human psyche is that we are often intrigued by the idea of taboo, and taboo always generates curiosity, which allows us to dig deeper into the forbidden and dark themes like a rabbit hole, and that's the only reason why people want to watch certain films. The legacy of guinea pig films. After creating a sensation among the audience due to its heavy graphic content, the first two movies in the series turned into some kind of urban legend for cinegoers. They became so popular that even the family-friendly video stores in Japan had to sell them because of their huge demand in the 80s. However, after a series of complaints and the notoriety created by Flowers of Flesh and Blood, the DVDs were seized from the stores, which the director of the movie, Hideshi Hino, considers a great success. Due to their low budget, found footage-style editing, and hazy camera effects, the audience started to think of them as actual snuff films. Even the FBI had to investigate the matter, and the makers had to demonstrate the practical effects in front of the FBI to convince them that they were fake. But despite all the controversies around these films, especially the first two films, Devil's Experiment and Flower of Flesh and Blood, which generated a profound impact on the world cinema for its blood-dripping graphic content, they are still loved by millions of fans all around the globe. Due to its popularity, American DVD production house Unearthed Films has created its own series of films named American Guinea Pigs, released between 2014 and 2017, taking inspiration from the original set of films. These films have their own stories and murder stories in a much more brutal way, but it is evident that these films have failed miserably to create such an impact on modern viewers as the originals did back in the 80s. One of the reasons why they failed may be because mutilation and murder aren't a subject of taboo for today's audience. They get to see much more concentrated violence in mainstream media and films than these fake snuff films did back in the day, so the ambiguity for such underground cinema has been dying gradually. Marvelous verdict. Although these movies are popular with the audience, there should be a sense of awareness. These movies can either influence a person positively or negatively. Positive impact helps us to do some good deeds for society or inspire ourselves to be better. But movies filled with unnecessary killings and grotesque violence can trigger you to do something terrible, like we've already talked about, the serial killer taking inspiration from the guinea pig series to commit horrendous criminal activities portrayed in these movies. If we talk about the guinea pig movies, they are now believed to be a series of fake snuff films designed to create hysteria among horror fans. But except for the first two films, they failed to maintain their sacred position among the fans, though the fifth movie, Mermaid and Manhole, is the superior movie for its more commercial approach, story, and direction. So, which of these highly controversial movies is your favorite? If there are any, do you enjoy bone-chilling, gory movies? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more entertaining content. Be safe always, and we'll see you on our next video.